Types of hand stitches and their uses. As we all know, before the sewing machine had come into use, the garment making was done exclusively by hand, and still we continue having the need for certain hand stitching styles for dress making. So here at the end of this video, you will be able to name and classify hand stitches, describe the uses of hand stitching. When you are in a rushed morning, what you will do if you find a tear in your sports dress or the strap on your party dress suddenly breaks off that you had planned to wear on your sports day or graduation day? Would you be smart enough to fix it? Or would you go to buy new cloth? Or run right out to find a tailor? Certainly, smarter one could fix it in a minute. No matter how careful you are, losing a button or tearing a hole in your dress is a fact of life. Sewing is a necessity, a part of life, a way to solve your own problems, and a way to express creativity. There are many amazing dressmaking projects that require a bit of sewing, but that doesn't mean you have to run right out and purchase a sewing machine. Yes, much can be done by hands at home with just three materials: needle, thread, and scissors. Hand stitching skills help you to fix your common clothing repair, and also it can turn your cloth more impressive and unique. And so now let's see some of the most common types of hand stitching and its application. Types of hand stitches and their uses. Basic stitches can be classified into constructive and decorative, which are used in embroidery. Constructive stitches can be further classified into temporary and permanent stitches. Temporary stitches are used for holding two or more layers of materials together before the permanent stitches are made. First, let's see how to thread the needle. For any kind of stitching, cut a length of thread 18 to 24 inches long. The cut should be at an angle so it will be easier to thread and won't split apart. Now put one end through the eye of the needle. Pull pieces together so they are even. Make a single knot by rolling the thread between your fingers as shown on the screen. Most fabrics have a right and wrong side. Remember that on your first stitch, pull the thread to right side of fabric. In contrast, after you have completed a stitch, pull the thread to wrong side of fabric to tie off the thread. To tie off the thread, grab a small area of the fabric with the needle. Wrap the thread around it 3 to 4 times as shown on the screen. Hand basting or tacking used to temporarily hold together 2 or more fabric layers during fitting and construction. It secures fabric layers that won't be subjected to stress. Baste temporarily in preparation for machine or hand sewing. For example, basting in a sleeve before sewing. Basting can be even, uneven, diagonal, and slip. To do the even basting, make evenly spaced stitches by taking the needle in and out of the fabric. End a line of tracking with one backstitch or a knot. To release the tacking stitches, cut off the knot and pull out the thread. The uneven basting stitch is made as same as the even basting stitch, except that the stitch on the upper side of the cloth is made about 2 or 3 times as long as the stitch on the underside of the cloth. This kind of stitching helps in holding together the lower part of a full skirt and basting the seams for cuffs. Next, diagonal basting is a series of parallel horizontal stitches that produce diagonal floats of thread on the top layer of fabric. The stitch is most often used in tailoring to hold fabric layers together. Also useful for slippery fabrics. Slim basting is that temporary uneven stitch that can make your stitching look invisible and at that same time join fabric quite effectively. It is one of the best techniques to close seams on stuffed toys or pillows and to attach linings. For permanent stitching, running stitch is like even stitch, used for fine seaming, tucking, mending, gathering, etc. Backstitch is the strongest hand stitch, and it works as machine stitches. To do the back stitch, begin with a couple of stitches worked on the spot, and then take a stitch and space. Take the needle back over the space and bring it out the same distance in front of the thread. Continue to the end of the seam. Fasten off with a couple of stitches on the spot. This type of stitch helps to hand set a zipper or attaches the trim. Also, it is used whenever the strength of the fold is important. Now let's learn some most common decorative stitches. First, the buttonhole is a permanent covering stitch used in making hand-worked buttonholes. To do the buttonhole stitch, bring the thread out on the lower line. Then, insert the needle in position in the upper line and take a straight downward stitch, keeping the working thread under the point of the needle. Pull up the stitch to form a loop and repeat. Remember that blanket stitch and buttonhole stitch are not the same. Blanket stitch got its name because the stitch was used to hold down the edge of a blanket. There are various types of blanket stitches, as shown on the screen. To do the regular blanket stitch, start from the back side. Then point the needle towards you and insert it through the right side of the fabric, about 1/4 inch over the preceding stitch. Keep the thread below your work and under the needle. The blanket stitch is often used to cover fabric edges decoratively. Chain stitch is another decorative hand stitch that can be sewed on clothing, linens and lingerie. A continuous series of looped stitches that form a chain. To do the chain stitch, fasten thread and bring up to the right side. For each stitch, loop the thread up and around. Insert the needle just behind where the thread emerges and bring it up, over the looped thread. Finally, pull the thread through to the left to form the looped stitch. Cross stitch is also a decorative or constructive stitching form. To do cross stitch, make horizontal stitches that take parallel to each other. These floats cross in the center to form X. Next, the fagoting stitch is useful decorative stitch to join two fabric sections by leaving space in between. On a paper, draw parallel lines to represent the width of the opening between folded fabric edges. Fold each seam line, fasten thread and bring up through one folded edge. Carry thread diagonally across the opening and up through opposite fold. Pass needle under the thread, diagonally across the opening and up through opposite fold. Continue in this way along with the entire opening, spacing stitches evenly. Conclusion. Now that you watched some of the hand stitching styles, it may be easy for you to fix your own clothes rather spending time and money on hunting down a tailor for fixing certain immediate needs. As expounded in the introduction, if you find a tear in your sports dress or the strap on your party dress suddenly breaks off, then you can fix it in a minute by backstitch and running stitching. Though knowledge is gained by learning, the skill can be developed only by practicing. So, if you want to become an excellent tailor, you will need to practice on your own time. Summary. In this video, you got to watch and understand that hand stitching skills help you fix your basic and common clothing repairs. Also, it can turn your clothes more impressive and unique. Basic stitches can be classified into constructive and decorative, which are used in embroidery. The technique to thread the needle and to tie off the thread. Types of basting, namely even basting, uneven basting, diagonal basting and slip basting. Permanent stitches like running and backstitch. Some decorative stitches such as blanket, buttonhole, chain, cross and fagoting.